Hi everyone and welcome to Module 3. We're now in week 8 and this set of slides is on workplace learning and knowledge management. We aim to examine learning within organisations and emphasise the importance of situating human resource development within a broad context, i.e. an organisation. So the organisation can be conceptualised as a learning system, and indeed should be. So learning is a sustained change in skills, behaviour and attitudes, as we've discussed before. But training or development does not necessarily result in learning for many reasons, but a couple of important ones here are the workplace doesn't offer a relevant context for the training and development. So the learner can't make the link to their work. It's just not relevant. The needs haven't been properly assessed, for example. And also, the learning mightn't be supported by the workplace. So you might have an old culture which isn't very open to new learning or thinking about new ways of doing things. So they mightn't in fact support the learning that's taken place in a formal program. With regard to management training, a person may not in fact be given enough opportunities to practice their new skills. That sort of thing. So, learning organisation does give a competitive advantage. It's looking at working well, performing well, and importantly it's about the intellectual capital that people within an organisation actually have, and that includes their relationships, their trust and commitment to each other, and their enthusiasm and sense of empowerment. So whilst a particular product can be copied by others, even a particular service or way of operating, a restaurant can have lots of things about it copied, but what it can't have copied is the relationships between people, the way they work together, the way they solve problems. So you can readily see that a learning organisation can give a competitive advantage. This clip is on the front of this particular week on the site, and it's a good one in terms of opening up all of these different ideas about a learning organisation. Emphasising that individual learning is an important element, that, for example, modelling positive approaches to learning, social aspects within a group, so being able to discuss uncertainty and alternative solutions. So this is the way individuals can learn. Learning organisations emphasise how we create and move ideas around an organisation. How do we make sure that we're sharing our knowledge? How do we respond to changing internal and external environments? So examples of internal environments are turnover increasing, perhaps quality decreasing, negative customer feedback. These things may be changing, and globally your external environment can be changing. Your competitors might be different now, etc. So learning organisation does focus on improving competitive advantages and requires processes and systems that encourage learning and enable improvement over time. So that's really what a lot of this lecture is actually about. Another important aspect is assessing a learning organisation. It's not very easy to do that. There's a lot of complexity. So Tenjay sort of looked at this idea of personal mastery. So that's an individual capacity. Can people actually do the job, do the work well? But moreover, do they have a shared vision? Do they know where they're heading, and are they understanding of that? Do they learn as a team? Do they have mental models that connect together? And do they think as a system? So if there's a problem in one area, for example, in customer service, systems thinking is therefore saying, well, okay, it might be a problem, this might be one problem, but what is linked to it and related to it? So it could be, in fact, something to do with the product that's being made, or the marketing that's occurring, or a lack of training, lack of opportunity to ask questions, a poor organisational culture. So thinking in systems is really central to understanding a learning organisation. Your textbook gives an interesting questionnaire, Dimensions of the Learning Organisation Questionnaire, DLIQ, on page 249 to 250 of the text. So do have a look at that and get a sense of how you might try and capture a learning organisational dimensions on a questionnaire. Another interesting aspect is this research that's been done by these two here, called Knowledge Management Process in Two Learning Organisations. It's the reading for this week, and it really shows a good conceptualisation of how to compare a high learning organisation with a low learning organisation in terms of knowledge management attributes. So that is another way of trying to grasp the complexities of learning organisations, actually comparing and highlighting what positive aspects are coming through in the better ones. So this, as you no doubt know, is a large topic with many aspects. So we'll just look at some of these now. One perspective is this idea of formal HRD processes versus informal processes. So a supportive learning culture might be informal, it might be quite hard to see, but it can really assist HRD processes. So if you've got a manager or your peers who are interested in what you're doing, asking questions, asking for advice, for example, and you have opportunities to practice new skills and to converse about what you're doing, that could be seen as a supportive learning organisation, which is informal but supportive of the formal HRD training and development that takes place. Another aspect is participation. And this is something that's important to look at in any organisation. Are there any historical, cultural norms that are forming barriers to participation? For example, are there certain groups or certain ages or certain ethnic backgrounds, or even people, the lower skilled people, who are missing out on training and development opportunities? So participation is key. HRD, as we've talked about, is something that's considered to be quite rewarding and quite helpful in terms of people's enthusiasm and orientation and ability at work. Also, it's important, this harks back to the needs discussion that we've had earlier, are different goals and interests being considered? So are people having the opportunity to say, well, this is really where I'd like to take my career, or this is something that I'm really interested in following up on? Could I have some extra training on that? That sort of thing. So another topic here is who contributes. So, of course, our argument is that everyone contributes by asking questions, by encouraging others, by having ideas about training and development. Everyone can contribute to being a learning organisation, passing on ideas, etc. In terms of HRD professionals and managers, they are particularly required to promote learning principles. So our idea that we've got about active learning. So making sure, for example, that your HR development training programs are well designed and that they've got opportunities for practice and actions. They can be persuaders of the importance of HRD, and that's shown on the next slide here. Persuaders are there in the middle. How do they actually show their enthusiasm and their persuasion for others in the organisation to work in a learning environment and have HRD opportunities? You need to be an enthusiast, I guess, and part of that can be persuading others as to the value of HRD, not in an unethical way, of course, but persuading about the positive outcomes of previous training programs, the positive outcomes that programs can have, and also trying to promote an informal positive system as well. the HRD programs that are developed either by inside the organisation or by an external company have to be effective. They need to be well designed, well worked out, and useful and relevant. So in those you need to make sure that there's all the components. At the very least, needs design and delivery that's really appropriate, and evaluation must be obviously included. HRD professionals and managers can support staff development and follow up about that. How did it go? Did transfer take place? Was it successful, etc. Another interesting perspective is on this idea of expansive and restrictive learning environments. You might have a coaching culture, for example, where the managers or leaders who are quite expert in some area, or a member of a team, can coach others to achieve those skills. So actively involve them in learning. Organisations require their employees to learn, so that sets a cultural value around, yes, we learn around here, it's important. Expansive environments would be ones, organisations that have access to learning. They're interested in people's qualifications, in offering them more qualifications, maybe through the vocational education and training sector or the university sector, supporting that. Interested in career progression, so really making it clear that we're looking at you, what can you do, what can you do further, what would you like to do. Showing people that their skills and their knowledge is valued, and encourage and support them. Obviously, restrictive learning environments are really the exact opposite to this, where people are left in their careers without much input from anyone else, or it seems that they're not supported and encouraged to learn more. Okay, so there's some of the important aspects. We've just talked about those. Going to go on now to talk about some of the major models or conceptualisations or frameworks that are around this idea of learning organisations. So we've talked about some key aspects, and these are some frameworks that have been put forward in the literature and used in practice. Ardress and Schoen were very early adopters of this idea of single loop and double loop learning. So single loop is really, there's a mistake, the current way of working is basically accepted, but once a mistake comes up, there is a response to that error. It's corrected and things are brought back to normal. So there's a focus on detecting and fixing errors, but really not a challenge to the accepted routines of how things are done. Any assumptions that are embedded are accepted, and it's a pretty common form of organisational learning, but I don't think we'd call it actually organisational learning, because the danger is that there's not enough thought put into the problems that are occurring, and if there's a broader system, the wider system is faltering in some way, and of course it's totally insufficient for more difficult problems. For example, where there's changing markets, changing technology, or issues with perhaps staff retention, you may not stay competitive, or you may not stay in business with just a single loop approach, not moving on and changing. So by contrast, you've got your double loop approach, which does in fact challenge assumptions. For example, an engineering company that might be being out-competed on cost by overseas competition. You can just think, oh, well, I'm being out-competed, but what do you actually have to do? Is there some way of challenging what you already do? Is there a different way of engineering or producing this, or changing in some way? Workers can often really help in this. They're the ones at the coalface. What do you think? What's the feedback you're getting? What's your ideas? Just there might be actual changes then that can occur that allow you to learn in this double loop way. So competitive advantage comes about by challenging your assumptions, thinking outside the box. Sorry, I've gone forward there. Okay, a second conceptualisation is really all around systems. Learning process within organisations. So understanding the organisation as a learning system is referred to as workplace learning. As I mentioned before, there can be an issue going wrong or some sort of alert in the system, and a systems approach says, well, okay, it's probably not just a one-off thing, or it's probably not an individual. Could be, but it may not be. There's usually a system that's breaking down more broadly. It challenges the idea that an organisation's a machine. An organisation's not a machine. It's made up of people interacting in their relationships. So even a breakdown in a relationship, say a manager and an employee, can have ripple-on effects throughout. The phenomenon of bullying in organisations is obviously one of these. Are people, what's happening, what's causing this, and are people standing by and watching, or are they actually doing something about it? It's a very complex problem, but it's a system-based problem that can't just be usually tied back to one individual or two individuals. Organisational learning, so the idea is that organisations learn like humans, and it adapts Kolb's learning cycle, which we did earlier in this unit. So it links individual, group and organisation levels of analysis. Kolb is really focused pretty much on one person on a group. So this approach says, okay, these things can be applied across the board. We can learn, we can interpret, we can integrate that into some sort of knowledge system, and we can share that and make new processes and new ways of working. So it emphasised the idea that organisations learn on a continual basis in a variety of ways. So there's an interdependence between strategy, the role of managers and teams, and knowledge transfer. So that brings up, of course, the importance of strategy that we already talked about in week 2, but it's central to all these the cases that we're looking at and these ideas. Requires a systematic approach to HRD with acknowledgement of complexity and array of factors. So acknowledging things like informal learning, which are really hard to pin down, but can be really important. This learning that comes through conversations and through sharing and that sort of thing, more informal relationships. However, there's a whole area of study, of course, on the role of power, politics, culture of organisation, subcultures within smaller groups. The need for power can be quite dominant in some people, and of course, so that could lead to a problem like not sharing information, because information at the end of the day is power. So there's this tension between individuals and sharing in some circumstances. Another perspective is on creating knowledge. The fact, and this is a little bit like the informal knowledge, but the tacit knowledge, it's hard to transfer. So we know how to ride a bike if we've learnt when we were a kid. That's sort of known to us tacitly. And sometimes our beliefs and our values and our perspectives are also tacit, in that we don't really know what they are. We might be biased against a certain group because our family was, but without even really thinking it through very much. And I think that's what education really is about, isn't it? It's sort of looking at our tacit values. What's our personal knowledge from our personal experience? It's a bit hard to get it out there sometimes, what we've actually learned. So explicit knowledge is easier to transfer. So it's like a machine. It's in a book. It's a procedure. It's a transfer via a demonstration. It's explaining. So this particular area looks at this this idea of tacit and explicit knowledge. This is a clip, also on the front of the site, and it's actually talks about this idea of how, well, it shows mainly visually, how do we take this tacit information, things that we might know, and make that more explicit. So something like being empathic, empathising, we might do that just without even really knowing what we're doing. But that's a really important skill. So to understand what we're doing, we have to tease that out. And so there's some research now that's looking at that. How do we actually teach this idea of being empathic? What are the actual verbal and non-verbal skills that you can use in that? So this little clip really looks at that. Okay, so this next slide just spells that out, really, the different aspects of that particular model. Basically, what it's getting at is, down the bottom there, a context of a shared space for knowledge creation. How can we create new knowledge and make some of the things that are tacit more explicit? And fifthly, the last thing under these models we'll look at is the cultural view of organisational learning, which is just a really practical way of intervening in a workplace. So communities of practice, I don't know if you've been involved in them, you may have. We have them here at Griffith, and some of them focus on research, for example, and so people interested in a particular area of research might go to those, etc. So they're learning groups situated within work. They tend to be more informal, so it could be more about sharing stories, or someone who's been successful in one area talking to others about that. Or it can be more formal, where you're actually being told quite formally the correct way to do things, or the espoused way of doing things. And it can draw on this idea too that local knowledge can differ from work manuals. So people get together and talk about how they've successfully, say, managed a difficult client, or successfully negotiated some sort of deal. That's something that can't be written down in a manual, say. So some sort of local knowledge can differ from work manuals, and that can be a really nice thing to be shared in a community of practice. Some organisations wouldn't be particularly keen on recognising them, these groups. That'll differ across organisation, and sometimes management can actually direct that they happen, but then they don't have to be necessarily amenable to management control, because people might come together and have a different view to management, for example, and that's fine as long as it's handled in a positive way. So knowledge creation and management, knowledge management, KM, is about the management of information. It tends to be that more practical aspect. The knowledge and experiences available to an organisation, so how do you create them, capture them, store them, make them available and utilisable, so that organisational activities can build on what's already known and extend it further. So, for example, you might have a guest speaker come into your organisation, say something that's quite interesting and powerful, but if there's no way of capturing that, then if you miss that, then that's that. So this idea, you would obviously do something like record that and put it on the intranet, maybe set up a time to talk about that, could be in a community of practice, whatever. So just how are we going to utilise that information and make it available? So the intranets in organisations that you'd be familiar with have gone a long way towards trying to organise this information, where you can see standard ways of doing things, instructions, and that sort of thing. Know how or know why is very important in knowledge management. How are we going to share knowledge in quick and efficient ways? Obviously many forms and sources, figures, information, written instructions, but we share knowledge also through rumours and gossip and our beliefs and stories and those sorts of things. So it's important that rumours and gossip are not the way that we manage our knowledge. You would have heard talk also knowledge-based economy, knowledge workers, and this is thought to be an important part of our intellectual capital, how to manage knowledge. So, summary and conclusion, organisations actually can't afford learning. There's no guarantee that they will learn and that it will benefit them though. To create a learning organisation or to develop it or make it better need to be positive and proactive approach to errors and to questions and to have a certain openness in relationships. Workplace knowledge is actually difficult to share, that you should say tacit, not tactic. And HRD professionals, the importance of seeing the wider systems of learning. So this really applies to you and it comes through in your cases. So the cases that I've recommended to read today, or this week, is the waterfall train case, which is a really sad case. But it actually went to, when it was analysed through the court processes, it was thought that their training and development processes were not good at all. And that's a really interesting case in looking at the systematic models of HRD that are needed. So there's a need to be aware of informal learning opportunities, learning organisational characteristics. How would you bring about a learning organisation in the case of that waterfall case? What would you draw on from what we've discussed? And the links between the individual, group and organisational level. So in this case, an individual actually made a terrible mistake, but what did that have to do with the wider group and the organisation, i.e. lack of training and development, lack of qualifications, lack of processes that can sustain an organisation. So looking ahead, there are some case studies on the website in Module 3, so just there's a link there to 3 cases. And they are interesting to look at. And the forthcoming topics will cover leadership and management development, talent and career management, cross-cultural HRD, HRD and diversity and the future of HRD. And these particular topics are all interrelated with the case studies that we'll be looking at, and they're interrelated together actually, and related to the other earlier parts of the unit. Okay, thank you very much. Happy researching those cases.